Let me just reiterate that I was never cut out to be an e-preacher. You know what I mean? My calling was never to be a televangelist, put your hands on the computer screen and send me your money. No. But we have learned a few things along the way over the last several months as a church family, and it has been and it continues to be a blessing to be able to do life together, to journey together as a church family. I am so thankful for the faithfulness that exists in this church family, for those that have gone above and beyond time and time again, and for those of you who continue to do so. What a blessing it is, how amazing it is to be a part of the kingdom of God, to recognize that no matter where you go, the kingdom is with you, and you're a part of the kingdom, and the kingdom breaks in around you as you live life. But also the blessing that it continues to be as a church family, as the Eastridge Church of Christ, to do this together. If you've been watching the live stream, you know that we have kept up with this series that we began before all of this started. This one continuous story, as we are considering Scripture as a whole, looking at how God is God to His people. All throughout the biblical text, looking from Genesis to Revelation, hitting the high point, seeing how God is God to His people, and also recognizing that everything, every facet of our being in the kingdom, every facet of the lives lived of those of the people of God then and those who are the people of God today, everything points to Jesus. Everything connects to Jesus. And we began this series of lessons, if you remember, the first Sunday of March, and then 2020 let us know that it was not something we would soon forget. But the idea behind this series of lessons, after we took the first couple of months of the new year, January and February, to recognize this 2020 vision and this call of loving God and loving others, the idea behind the series, it began out of some conversations with our elders to present the basic story of the Bible, recognizing that we all come to faith uniquely. We all come to faith with different backgrounds, with different experiences. We come to faith from different perspectives and different places in life. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, and yet also recognizing that within this church family, each and every one of us, we bring to the table something different. There are those who are a part of this church family who have been Christians for decades and decades and decades, and who know the Bible forward and backwards. And there are also those who are a part of our fellowship that are relatively new to faith, still trying to take it all in. And whenever we call out book, chapter, and verse, you're not the first one to turn there. And what I want you to hear is that the focus and emphasis behind this series is to bring each and every one of us to the table, recognizing that no matter where you're at in that spectrum of experience, we're all connected. We're connected to God and to one another through this one continuous story. This week we find ourselves, if you want to go ahead and turn there, in Numbers chapter 13, or open your electronic device there, if you will. And if you've been a part of this in the last several months, you know that for some 12, 13 weeks now, we've considered events out of Genesis and Exodus. Those are the first two books of the Bible. We've spent about a quarter, almost a third of our time in this series in those first two books of the Bible, because there's so much there. There's so much that we couldn't leave behind, and it all points toward where we're going. And so we needed to spend some time with those events in Genesis and in Exodus. The third book of the Bible is Leviticus. We're skipping that. No one ever said that their favorite book of the Bible was Leviticus, and so it's okay. But building upon where we've been, Israel and the Hebrew people, the chosen, promised people of God, those who have been blessed and those who have been provided for by God, who were chosen by God to be His people in the world. God, He's given them. He's not only given them the Ten Commandments, we saw that recently, instruction upon how to worship Him and how to relate to Him and how to love Him in return. God, He's led them on their journey. A pillar of fire at night, a cloud by day, Moses at the helm. God, He's provided food for His people in the desert, quail and manna. The Hebrew word for manna is manna. It simply means, what is it? Because that's what the people ask, right? When they saw the manna from heaven, they ask, what is it? I'm not quite sure what it tasted like. There's a little bit of a description in the Bible. But whatever it tasted like, I promise you it tasted better than what you just had in your rip and sips a few minutes ago. But look with me at Numbers chapter 13. That stuff's definitely unleavened, right? Look with me at Numbers chapter 13. As the journey to the promised land, as God instructs Moses to send out those who would explore this land that God has promised. This land flowing with milk and honey. I've got a little note here. See cool watermark. We've been putting these watermarks each week of this series. This land that's been promised, this land flowing with milk and honey. And Moses chooses 12. He chooses 12 men, one from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, to go and to explore the land. Pick up with me in verse 17 of Numbers chapter 13. When Moses sent them to explore Canaan, he said, "Go up through the Negev and on into the hill country. See what the land is like, whether the people who live there are strong or weak, or few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or is it bad? What kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or are they fortified? How's the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are there trees in it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit of the land." It was the season for the first ripe grapes. And so they go. They go and they do just that. And they bring back some fruit from the land. Verse 25 reads, "At the end of 40 days, they returned from exploring the land." I've shared this a couple of times in this series because we've seen it a few times already. Every single time in the Bible, when you see the number 40 or some sort of variation of 40, some sort of multiplication of 40, it indicates a time of testing. Jesus in His ministry, he'll be led into the desert to be tempted for how long? For 40 days. We saw recently as we considered Israel, the people of God, as they're in captivity in Egypt. How long are they in captivity? Over 400 years. Some variations are 430 years, but over 400. Why is that significant? Because it's 40 times 10. Every time you see the number 40 or a variation of it, it indicates a time of testing. Stick with me a few more minutes, and let's watch what happens. Verse 26 and following. They came back to Moses and Aaron. Who did? Those who were sent out to explore this land. They came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran. There they reported to them and to the whole assembly, and they showed the fruit of the land. They gave Moses this account: "We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. It is plentiful. Look here, here's the fruit. But the people who live there are powerful. Their cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The the Hittites and Jebusites and Amorites and the Perizzites, just making sure you're paying attention. All these different people, they live in the hill country. Not the hill country here in Texas, but the hill country there. They live there, and the Canaanites, they live near the sea along the Jordan. Verse 30. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, "We should go up. We should take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it." But the men who had gone up with them said, "We can't attack those people. They are stronger than we are." And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land that they had explored. They said, "The land we explored, it devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there. We seemed like grasshoppers in their own eyes. And we looked the same in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them." If you keep reading, and if you consider the next chapter, chapter 14, you'll see that because of the fear of Israel, God is not pleased. And the presence of God, the glory of God, descends upon the tent of meeting. The same glory of God that had descended upon Mount Sinai as God gives Israel the Ten Commandments, in darkness and gloom and storm and thunder and lightning, in power, in glory. The same glory of God that passes by Moses there in Exodus 33 and 34 as Moses is held in the cleft of the rock and as God passes by, declaring who He is. The glory of God descends upon the tent of meeting among Israel, but God is angry. He's angry with His people because His people are so weak and so fearful. And His people, they fundamentally fail to trust that He is God, to trust that He has made these promises to them, and so they're punished. Only Joshua and Caleb came back and said, "We don't care what's in front of us. What matters is that God is with us. We don't care what stands in front of us. What matters is that the Lord is with us." So the other 10 who had explored the land with Joshua and Caleb, but who failed to trust God to give them the victories that they were going to require, they're all struck down. As a matter of fact, because of their wilderness whining, if you continue to read, you'll see that God, He prolongs Israel's journey to the Promised Land for 40 more years. Every year for every day of their fearful exploration. Again, the number 40, a time of testing. Those 20 and older won't make the 40-year journey. Only Joshua and Caleb do. Moses himself will only see it from a distance. If you look to the end of the book of Deuteronomy, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, in chapter 34, there's this beautiful description there of the death of Moses. Moses dies upon Mount Nebo after God had shown him the promised land from a distance. God leads him up on this mountain as He had done other times. He reveals the promised land. He shows the promised land to Moses. And then the text simply reads, "Moses, the servant of the Lord, died." I think that designation, Moses, the servant of the Lord. If at the end of our lives, if our epitaph, if our tombstone, if our marker might read, insert your name, the servant of the Lord, I'm telling you, we'd be doing all right. What a beautiful description. Joshua becomes Israel's leader, led by the Spirit, and that's where we're going to pick up next week. But this is what I want you to hear in regard to this journey to the promised land, and specifically in regard to the faith of Joshua and Caleb. The promised land of Canaan, it's called the promised land. Why? I mean, yes, it was abundant. Yes, it was plentiful. But the promised land is called the promised land. Why? Because God had promised it to His people, right? I mean, I know it just makes sense. That may seem obvious, but I don't want to take that for granted. The promised land, it is called the promised land because God has promised it to His people. This land of abundance, this land of provision, flowing with milk and honey. I love it whenever Dwight Walker, during a shepherd's moment, Dwight will say something like, Eastridge is not the promised land, but you can see it from here. You can get there from here. I mean, yes, he also says, isn't it great to be here? Aren't you glad you came? But that statement of Eastridge is not the promised land, but you can see it from here. You can get there from here. Really what he's saying is the church is perfect. Don't mishear me. The church is perfect. We're made perfect through Christ. But the people, we're far from perfect. The church is perfect, but the people in it ain't perfect. As a matter of fact, if you ever find the perfect church, don't go there, because you'll mess it all up. But the promised land is called the promised land because God has promised it to His people. There was absolutely nothing that was going to stand in any of their ways. Not just the other 10 who go out with Joshua and Caleb. There is nothing that was going to stand in the way of the entire Israelite people of God. Nothing that was going to stand in their way. Except one thing. Themselves. Their fear. And just as Israel is on this imperfect journey to the promised land, you and I, we are as well, as we anticipate eternity. We trust that we are on our own imperfect journey to the promised land. We trust in the promises of God. We trust in the God who has not only promised us eternity, but the God who has promised us the Holy Spirit, the God who has promised us salvation. We trust in the God who has promised us, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. But here's the question. As you and I, as we are imperfectly journeying with God and with one another, are you Joshua and Caleb on this journey, or are you the other 10? Joshua and Caleb, they come back to the others and they are excited. They are so excited. God's on our side. Yes, there are obstacles. Yes, those obstacles seem insurmountable. Yes, those obstacles are great, but they don't matter. Why don't they matter? Because God is on our side. The others, they only looked at the obstacles. They didn't look to see God. And their fear got in the way of their faith. And you know, we look at them and we say, come on, guys. Have some faith. Don't you know who you serve? Don't you know the God that you serve? Don't you know what God has done? Haven't you been paying attention to what God has done throughout the history of the world? Haven't you paid attention to what God has done throughout the history of you as a chosen people? Haven't you paid attention to what God has done in your own life? Hasn't He demonstrated that He can be trusted? Hasn't He demonstrated that He alone is God? Hasn't He called you to be bold, to have faith? And certainly, we see it in them. But I wonder if we can't see it in ourselves. Too often, our fear drives more of our actions or our lack thereof than we'd ever like to admit. And in a world that is spiraling out of control, in a full-blown health crisis, a looming financial crisis, an absolutely gut-wrenching societal crisis, faith, not fear, must characterize the chosen people of God. Do we trust God? Think of this. Ever since Genesis chapter 3, the world has struggled. We have struggled individually. We've struggled communally. We've struggled globally. Since the fall, the world has been broken, equally broken. Sometimes I'll have a conversation that'll go something like this. Someone will say, the world has never been as messed up as it is right now, Jason. Wrong. It's been equally as messed up since Genesis chapter 3. And we messed it up. The world is broken. Maybe in these most recent days we have been made acutely aware of the brokenness of our world. But what I want you to know is that there is hope. And there's hope that's found here today. And it's found in the one place that it has always been found. In the safe and secure hands of a sovereign God who is faithful and true to His promises, to His chosen people. Leo Tolstoy, in War and Peace of all places, he writes, "One needs a vision of the promised land in order to have the strength to move." You see, fear often paralyzes. One needs a vision of the promised land in order to move, to have the strength to move. And so we need a vision. And when you think about it, when are we most called to trust in God? Rather than to focus upon our circumstances, when are we most called to focus upon Him? In times of trial? When life is hard? In our pain? In our grief? In our brokenness? In our uncertainty? And it's especially during those times that we are called by God to see beyond the circumstances and to look to what God has promised. What do we know to be true? Which is what the gospel of Jesus is all about. The gospel of Jesus is all about trust. The gospel is all about trusting God. The God who sends His Son to die on our behalf. The gospel is all about trust. This is the God who pursues His people, who loves His people, who blesses His people, who provides for His people, and it's the God who's always been faithful to His people. The gospel, this one continuous story, culminating, focusing upon, centered upon Jesus and the gospel of Jesus, the gospel's all about trust because it's a story of trust. And so maybe today you need to trust God. Maybe today you need to trust God in a specific way. Maybe you need to trust God right now in your marriage. I'm not saying you've got all the answers. I'm not saying you know what to do. I'm not saying that you've got it all figured out. Maybe today you need to trust God in your marriage. Maybe you need to trust God with your kids. Maybe you need to trust God with your adult kids. Maybe you need to trust Him in restoring relationships. Maybe you need to trust God with your health. Maybe you need to trust Him with all of the uncertainties and the turmoil and the things that are going on that I mentioned earlier. Maybe you need to trust God in the middle of all of this. I know I do. Maybe today, maybe you need to trust God with your eternity. Maybe you need to trust God with your salvation. It may be that there's somebody here and you've never been baptized into Christ. Is it? Is it because of a lack of trust? Trust God. Trust Him. In any of those and in any other way, maybe you're wrestling, maybe you're struggling, maybe you have pain or doubt or burden. Trust God, which is what the gospel's all about. And so this morning, before I bring things to a conclusion, I want to leave you with the text that Chad read from a few minutes ago. After I read this text, I'm going to offer. It'll be a time of response. I guess I'll go ahead and offer the invitation now. If you're in need of responding to the gospel of Jesus in some way, what an amazing thing it would be to journey alongside of you this morning. This first Sunday back with this new beginning as a church family. And if you've never been baptized into Christ, what a beautiful day today would be to submit your life to Him. But I want to leave you with this priestly blessing that's found in Numbers chapter 6. And I simply want to read this blessing to you. This is from God to His people then, and it's from God to His people today. And we skipped it on our way to the story of Joshua and Caleb. But it's God's blessing to His people. And it's the blessing that I want for you and I just to sit within and to dwell within and to find rest and peace within today as we seek to trust Him. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make His face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn His face toward you and give you peace. And if trusting God is about anything, it's about peace. Let's stand and let's sing.